Dear Constanze Stelzenmüller, dear EMPA graduates, families and friends, dear board members, faculty, staff, and dear guests, welcome to the EMPA graduation 2017. You have to cheer now. Today we're bidding farewell to the 24 EMPA graduates. They come from 12 countries. They have successfully completed their studies and will now join a network of over 1,200 alumni from the Hertie School. It goes without saying, dear graduates, that we're very, very proud of you. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of all of us here when I say that we're looking forward to following your career path in the future and how you will progress in your line of work. This year graduating class, just as the previous ones, has been dedicated and hardworking. You had to juggle many challenges: work, study, travel, and of course family life. Yet many of you still managed to make major contributions to the life of the Hertie School as well. For example, student lectures, contributions to the student magazine, the Governance Post. Yesterday, we had the EMPA Master Thesis poster presentation for the second time. We were all impressed by the range of topics that went from political sleepwalking, the unwinding of regulatory capacity in democracies, to tweeting the Brexit, an analysis of framing effects on Twitter during the 2016 UK referendum on EU membership. And we were really impressed not only by the range, but also by the quality of the posters. It was a very hard job for the jury to decide on the winner. And as you recall, or many of you will recall, the winner was Thor Lund Larsen for his thesis on political sleepwalking. Congratulations again. On this note, let me also thank Ivana Pončević and Anton Hufnagel, this year's EMPA graduation speakers, and they have agreed to take on this very important task. They will be on stage after this speech by Constanza. So, dear graduates, let me extend my warmest congratulations to you all. I wish you all the best for the future, and please do keep in touch and become active member of our alumni network. We know that you are the best advertisement for the school and that we get some of our best students through our alumni. And please keep that in mind and keep sending us talent. I'd also like to thank those of the EMPA team for their hard work and dedication to the program. Most importantly, I would like to thank Andrea Römmele, the EMPA program director. I'd also like to thank Susan Park-Gessner, Robert Check, and Julianne McCarthy. I think they all owe us a hand for the work they did. So let me now welcome and introduce today's commencement speaker, Constanze Stelzenmüller. She's an expert on European and transatlantic foreign relations, security policy, and strategy. She is the inaugural Bosch Senior Fellow in the Center on the United States and Europe and the Brookings Institutions, and I welcome the representative of the Bosch Foundation here as well. Prior to working at Brookings, she was with the German Marshall Fund and directed the Marshall Fund Berlin office for a number of years. Prior to that, she was a journalist and was the political editor at the German weekly Die Zeit. She also covered, in her capacity as editor, human rights issues and humanitarian crisis. Before that, she had various visiting appointments in the United States, including the Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington. She holds a doctorate from the University of Bonn, a doctorate in law, and a master's degree in public administration from the Kennedy School at Harvard. Constanza is not a stranger to the Hertie School. She has in the past participated in various events, and we're doubly delighted that you, in a way, are a repeat customer but for the first time, you're in a new role, and we're delighted that you could accept our invitation. We look forward to your speech with the intriguing title, Life Lessons from an Unreliable Source. Constanze, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this very kind introduction. I was told to not give a policy speech, and I was told to make it personal, and that of course forced me to examine my own qualification, and that's why I called it Life Lessons from an Unreliable Source. I have every reason to call it that. But dear Helmut, dear members of the faculty, board members, ladies and gentlemen, but above all, dear graduates of the Executive Master of Public Administration class of 2017, first things first, I offer you my warmest congratulations on your achievement and my very best wishes for the next steps in your career and life that lie ahead of you. You've put yourself, as I've seen, through a demanding course of study, culminating in a thesis. I've read the list of theses, sounded really interesting, and all this in a city and country that for many of you, I gather, is not your home. And in fact, some of you have come from really far away, from Australia, Russia, Norway, even Switzerland. And I hope that all this gives you a huge and deserved surge of confidence and energy as you continue on your individual path. This is a big deal, and I say this also because when I went to law school, our certificates were mailed to us. We never got pomp and circumstance, and I'm really impressed by this. So thank you very much for letting me live through that vicariously, at least. This happens to be the first time that I've been asked to give a commencement speech, and thinking about this long and hard and with some pain, led me to the shocking realization that my own commencement at Harvard will have been 30 years ago next year. Then I was 26. That means I must be 55 today. And so I asked myself, what have I done? What have I learned in this time that I can possibly offer to you as an experience that could possibly be relevant and useful to you as you contemplate the life and the career that lies ahead of you in a world that is both much more connected and much more disruptive than mine was. And so I have decided to divide my talk into 6 lessons, one longish, the other ones are going to be shorter, and the final ones will be quite short. My first lesson, which strikes me as really important, given the age that I've just revealed to you, is that aging sucks less than you may think. It's both a cliche and true to say that we are probably physically fitter than our parents and certainly our grandparents. The more interesting aspect, though, is what happens to our minds. In all honesty, 30 years ago, the notion of experience was completely meaningless to me. I treated it with contempt. Today, of course, experience gives me background, context, filters. It helps distinguish what's important from what isn't, and simply put, one freaks out less. I used to freak out quite a lot in my 20s, and it's frankly a relief that this happens less than it used to. So, as I said, aging is better than you've been told. And for those of us who expect to adapt, learn new things, and shift gears throughout our lives, it isn't even all that important, honestly. You should understand, though, that the process of aging isn't linear. Profoundly shocking life experiences, what the poet Johann Wolfgang von Goethe in his theory of the novella called die unerhörte Begebenheit, can throw you into a dark cave for years, and they can also light a clear flame in you. And in one of my favorite novellas of all, Die Marquise von O by Heinrich von Kleist, the heroine has to undergo a truly extraordinary test of character and fortitude. For any of you who haven't read it, please do read it. She passes this test, and as she leaves the place of her ordeal in a carriage, the story was published in 1808, Kleist says of her, durch diese schöne Anstrengung mit sich selbst bekannt gemacht, by this splendid effort revealed to herself, which I think is a lovely passage and tells you something about what that kind of experience may do to you. Nor, I have to tell you, does aging produce consistency, and I personally believe consistency is overrated. The older people I admire most are those who combine a mature judgment, youthful enthusiasm and curiosity, and a rather childish sense of humor. Minions, anyone? I like the Minions. And as for my fellow graduates back in 1988, we will probably remain 26 to each other until we die. And I have no doubt that some of my best loved friends, the ones who asked me to be godmother to their children, would be laughing like hyenas at the idea of my giving a commencement speech. You will find, as I did and still do, that the affectionate sarcasm and the laser-sharp criticism of your generational cohort keeps you grounded. Finally, know that when the first wrinkles appear around your eyelids, a fine coat of Vaseline on the bathroom mirror really works wonders. That brings me to a somewhat more serious second lesson, which is that your future, as mine did, holds unimaginable disruptions. Your circumstances, of course, and I know you were older as executive masters than we were when we graduated, but your circumstances are as different from mine 30 years ago as mine were from those of my parents in the early 1950s. My West German parents belonged to a generation that had lived through the horror of World War II and the Holocaust as young adults or children. Survival literally was a miracle for them. What came after was a piece of cake in comparison. And the shadow of war and genocide, of course, loomed long over their lives. And the prospect of nuclear annihilation throughout the Cold War wasn't exactly cheerful. But they lived through the post-war economic upspring, the creation of NATO and the EU, and saw the fall of the Berlin Wall in their later lives and the reunification of Europe. They had seen rather too much of history, of course, to buy Francis Fukuyama's theory that it was all going to be over in 1989. But for them, the post-war era up to the very end of their lives was one of ever-increasing optimism. As for us 20-somethings in the mid-1980s, compared to your much globally traveled and connected generation, we were hopelessly provincial. To begin with, there were no public policy schools in Germany at the time, and I frankly think it's wonderful that schools like the Hertie School and some others exist. This was something that was direly needed, and it's a remarkable achievement that we now have this. My law school teachers at the time explained that the law would prepare us for anything and everything, and if you had to do something more shallow, you could always do economics. So frankly, we left for America. The labor market, as I was saying to one of you earlier as we were waiting for pomp and circumstance, the labor market didn't want us anyway in the mid-80s. And in my case, as Helmut kindly said, I was lucky enough to get this fellowship to Harvard. And it's hard to comprehend today, and it's probably very hard for you to comprehend just how big a step that was. Airline travel from a student perspective cost a fortune, you just didn't do it. International phone calls were really expensive, and transatlantic love affairs tended not to last as a consequence. Letters, not so great. Our source of news was NPR and the New York Times, and international newspapers were to be had either in the libraries or at the kiosk in Harvard Square, always at least a week late, incredibly expensive, and very small numbers. And so the result was that our ties to our old lives thinned very quickly. And the result of that was that we realized that we'd been given an enormous gift, which was the gift of freedom, first, from parental observation, from families, social constraints, and observations. This varied from whether you were German or Indian, female or male, but the effect was quite remarkable on most of us. And even more importantly, and the one follows from the other, of course, it was the freedom to reinvent ourselves. And for the Europeans, our transplantation to America meant liberating from the stagnating politics of the Cold War, which seemed at the time, of course, as though it would last forever and ever. We could not imagine that this would ever change. And of course, for the Germans, again, all West Germans, of course, there were no East Germans. And of course, no Russians, no Chinese, no Indians, no Ukrainians. Our terrible 20th century history always went with us, but it no longer seemed quite as oppressively life-determining. Some of you may have seen the recent television series made by Sundance, Deutschland 83. That's pretty much the atmosphere that we left Germany in, and it was quite dark and quite oppressive. And of course, in this giddy, churning, anything-goes atmosphere of Reagan-era America, liberation meant the permission to transform. Most aspects of identity were up for discovery, invention, or renegotiation. Some of our friends came out as gay, which took huge courage in the early years of the AIDS crisis. And for the women, we were thunderstruck to realize that our American female classmates spoke about their career expectations as though they were men. It is hard to conceive today just how shocking this was for us. That, for me, certainly, now, 30 years later, is a huge measure of progress. It was truly electrifying and very empowering. And the last thing that was empowering was that our American teachers seemed to want to teach us and want us to succeed. This was also something we weren't used to. Judith Sklar, an eminent Harvard scholar of political philosophy, a Jew from Riga who had fled to America via Shanghai and Canada and who was my most beloved and revered teacher, once said to me, "Constanza, in German exams, they were trying to show you what you don't know. We here want to know what you do know." And I'm hoping that was different for you here too, because things in Germany have changed too. Now, a lot of us at the time stayed in America because we didn't want to come back to America. And I was thinking about it myself until one cold morning in November of 1989. I'd stayed on to write a doctoral thesis when everything changed. A friend of mine called me up and said, "Turn on the TV." I did. And there were pictures of the wall and in grainy black and white, and people were dancing on it and waving champagne bottles. And I did something that profoundly surprised me because I had never given the wall much thought. To me, this was part of the Cold War dispensation, part of the punishment for World War II and the Nazis and the Holocaust. I burst into tears. And I was back on a plane to Germany on December 5th, full of hope and excitement, and I wanted to be a part of this. And to me, one of the truly greatest things of my life is how much has changed in this town, and the fact that we are now standing here in what used to be East Berlin. And I'm standing in front of you, a class literally from all parts of the world, and that we can be here together. I still find that remarkable, and as you can see, it still chokes me up. So as Helmut said, I was lucky in my further path, I became a journalist. I did an internship here in recently reunified Berlin. I joined Die Zeit and later the think tank, and I lived through and increasingly wrote about the end of the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union, the enlargement of NATO and the EU, genocide in Rwanda and the Balkans and war crimes tribunals, the creation of an international criminal court, and Germany's cautious steps towards a more forward-leaning foreign policy. I was in Rwanda, I was in the Balkans, I was in Afghanistan. Again, all unimaginable for somebody who finished law school in Bonn in 1985. And it was an extraordinarily heady time to live and to write about. And like my parents, I wasn't so sure about the whole end of history thing, but again, I was like they, convinced that things would only get better because they had to, right? And because that's how it had been going. In particular, I and my generation, we were convinced that universal human rights, liberal democracy, and good governance were on a roll and could never be rolled back. And I realize that now this must all seem very far away for you and maybe quite unduly optimistic and cheerful. A friend of mine went to a seminar hosted by a foreign ministry, a European foreign ministry recently, and posted on Facebook that the hosts were calling the 90s the utopian decade. I find that incredibly saddening because I do refuse to believe that this was just a blip on the screen. And I would say that you actually have some advantages that we didn't have and that are enormous increases in freedom. Data, ideas, goods, and in fact you yourselves are as mobile as no generation before you. You've already seen more of the world and worked in more places than we could have thought possible at your age. And if I'm not mistaken, you take entirely for granted that you and you alone decide who you are and that you can change your mind whenever you please, that identity is fluid, multiple, fungible, changeable over time. So to me, compared to us 30 years ago, you seem enviably free. Yet, you must be as aware as I am, or even more so, that at the same time, the political landscapes around us, domestic, European, transatlantic, and global, have darkened. The international order that my parents' generation created, which we inherited, appears to be under siege from all sides. American leadership of the free world is in question as never before, and it is being challenged aggressively by other powers. The transatlantic relationship, traditional bulwark of the West, is at issue on both sides of the Atlantic. And so is free trade and globalization. all things that I grew up believing were good and would be forever and worth cherishing and preserving. Europe itself is riven by political divides, north and south and east and west and more, and some European leaders, of course, openly doubt the validity and viability of the European project itself. Ivan Krastev, the Bulgarian intellectual, a friend of mine who spoke to the incoming class of Hertie students yesterday, is arguing in his new book, After Europe, that the migration crisis may in fact herald the disintegration of the European Union. And of course we know that at home, populists and ethno-nationalists, not just in America, are repudiating democracy itself, and with it the most fundamental principles of Western constitutionalism, such as the separation of powers and the protection of minorities against the tyranny of the majority. For me, as a German of my generation, a German who was taught by emigre Jews in America, that is truly shocking. That is just about the worst thing I can think of. But even if the worst predictions that are currently somewhat en vogue fail to pass, so if winter doesn't come after all, one thing does seem absolutely certain to me, which is that my generation's blithe assumption that the Western model would somehow self-replicate automatically all over the world because everybody would want to be like us has turned out to be incorrect. The future of the Western-led order is literally open, and so is yours, in more ways and more troubling ways than was ever the case for us. So how can you prepare, and what can I possibly tell you about this, for a life of disruption? And I think my third lesson then, this is where things get shorter, don't worry, don't just be consumers of fate. When I was your age, there was a widespread belief among my peers that we would be inheriting a world that others had designed. State institutions, the economy, society, all these were parts of a carefully calibrated system that we would somehow have to learn how to operate and perhaps perform the odd repair job on. But we thought it would essentially maintain itself, and we would never ever be asked to redesign it. Now, of course, the fall of the war in 1989 blew a fairly large hole into this assumption. But your generation will have to adapt and indeed invent on a broader scale than any other generation before you. And I'm not suggesting, of course, that you throw everything overboard. Human rights, the vote, independent courts, alliances of Western democracies, none of this should be up for disposal, and it's in fact worth fighting for, and I hope you may never have to. But the digitalization of every aspect of our lives has consequences for the functioning of the state, for the future of work, for democratic participation in ways that we've only just begun to understand. And the work of adaptation still lies before us. And of course, globalization and integration will remain with us, contrary to what the Nigel Farages and the Stephen Bannons of this world believe. They're facts of life. They're not a wrong ideology, a false consciousness, as they used to say in the 60s, or, God forbid, fake news. But we do need to do much better at distributing their benefits and burdens equitably and at protecting the weak and the disadvantaged from their impact. Arguably, today's populist surges are punishments for our failure to do so until now, and this is a task that lies before you. So in sum, you will have to be citizens rather than just consumers, architects rather than just repairmen. And that brings me to my fourth lesson, which is to embrace your own personal disruptions. Now, you, because you've already worked, because you've written CVs and rewritten them, you will know that as we work through our lives, we tend to rewrite our stories as a compelling linear narrative of seamless upward progress, just like history, right? Most professional CVs bear very eloquent testimony to this creative editing process. And in fact, most of us actually believe ourselves when we do this. And let me tell you, and if I didn't tell you my friends would, that my life path since graduation has been more often than not shaped by ignorance, naivete, luck, and chutzpah. Sometimes I only found that out afterwards, and there are phases that I remember with sadness and regret. I owe a great deal to the kindness and the forbearance of others, and if it happens to you, recognize it, be grateful for it, and remember to pass it on. That said, I believe one thing did save me several times, and that was an inner voice that dared me to explore new things, even in the face of a chorus of disapproval, and my own fear of failure. As you've heard, I've trained in the law, then did a public policy master, then wrote a doctoral thesis, then did a journalistic internship, then joined a weekly paper, and then left it for an American think tank. Every single time, people whose judgment I really cared about said I was insane. And I did it anyway, but at the same time, I was terrified they might be right, and of course, I had no way of knowing that they were not. Some of my new beginnings were really, really hard, and there were long stretches where I was pretty sure that the people who said I was insane were actually, sadly, right. But it's worked out. Some of you may have seen the 2014 Richard Linklater movie Boyhood. It follows its central character from childhood into adult life and was filmed over the course of 12 years in real time. And in one really memorable scene near the end, the boy's mother, played by Patricia Arquette, downsizes her household after both her children have moved out. And as she packs her boxes, she says, in a mixture of tears and bewilderment, "I thought there would be more." And that scene has stayed with me, but it's actually not a feeling that I share. And nor should you. Live in such a way that you won't. Listen to that inner voice, summon that inner strength, face your fear, and dare to follow your interest, and if it all goes wrong, at least you will have owned your mistake. That brings me to my last two very short lessons. Lesson 5, beware people who don't have a sense of humor. People who know what's funny usually can be trusted to know what isn't. And I mean that very seriously. Lesson 6, and there's a reason why I say this, be kind. Political correctness is tedious, yes, but it will not have escaped you that in these disruptive times, a new cruelty is returning to public discourse. Fight it wherever you can. And that's my last word to you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, congratulations to everyone. As we all know, there's more in life than career, right or wrong. Therefore, we want to start our little party program with an old German song about love.
Mein Name President Anhaya,
Professor Römmele,
members of faculty and administration,
EMPA team,
Frau Dr. Stelzenmüller,
dear guests,
new students,
members of the graduating class of 2017.
We would not be here without you. Anton and I probably would not have met for the first time in hallway an hour ago if you had not selected us as your student speakers for this event. And our choices have generally been appropriate.
We took airplanes, trains, cars, or the S-Bahn to get here on so many Thursday mornings. And whether we boarded a plane in New York City or an S-Bahn in Pankow, we chose to spend that time of the journey on the last 400 pages of accounting literature.
In sun, rain, or snow, we chose to skip the cafeteria and get the fancy Einstein coffee on Friedrichstrasse. And although they could never show it, professors deep down in their hearts could not blame us when we came to class 5 minutes late carrying that paper cup with the Einstein logo.
And we chose to hit that send button on every due date at 11:59 p.m. in our respective time zones to hand in the assignment or simply to explain to the EMPA team that a civil war had just erupted in our home country. We had been nominated to negotiate a ceasefire, and that countless lives could be saved if only the due date for Professor Enderlein's assignment could be moved for another week.
And we chose to spend our time here at the Hertie School. Some of us for an intense year in Berlin, and some of us over 2 years. Time away from our busy jobs, but also time away from our families and friends. So today is the day to not only congratulate ourselves, but also to say thank you to our partners and our families who were there for us when we could not be with them.
And now, the EMPA graduating class of 2017 has chosen us to speak for itself. And again, that is a smart choice, because Ivana and I don't know each other. I've taken all my courses in the first year before moving to the US, and Ivana only arrived here last year as a full-time student. Our judgments were arrived at independently. So when we spoke on the phone to prepare this speech, and we both agreed that Berkan dresses rather well, that probably means something.
And there's something else we agreed upon, how this EMPA class is the true showcase of what Hertie has to offer. Sure, you can have 100 of MPP students in a room, and every single one of them thinks that he or she will become Secretary General of the United Nations by 2025.
But really, and no disrespect, we love our MPP brethren dearly. They've just graduated from college and have a few internships under their belt.
In this room, we have 4 students wearing the Hertie scarf who are currently working for the United Nations. They're not Secretary Generals yet, but who knows what happens after graduation.
There are EMPA students here working in critical positions for their national governments.
There are NGO leaders among us who are pushing those governments to do the right thing.
And then last, but not least, there are our friends from Deutsche Bahn who are just trying to build You never get to finish one of these Deutsche Bahn jokes. I want to try anyways. Our friends from Deutsche Bahn who are just trying to build the world's best tunnels.
And over the 2 last years, this diverse group of people came together here at the Hertie School. And I mean, come together to learn from great professors, but also to learn from each other's experiences. And one of the highlights, our trips to London or Brussels. Where did you go, Anton?
I was part of the London group last year. This was just a few weeks ahead of the referendum, and in every ministry that we visited, senior staff was telling us how they didn't need a plan for Brexit because it wasn't going to happen. No way, 100%.
I traveled to London this May, and guess what? We met with representatives of the Department for Leaving the EU. It felt so uncomfortable when I presented myself as part of Serbia's negotiating team for EU accession talks. I mean, uncomfortable for them. Still, we realized one thing. Ethics in senior service was remarkable. Regardless of their personal views, they keep implementing the state policies firmly.
And then there was the refugee crisis in Europe, and every non-German speaker in our class can now recite the famous "Wir schaffen das," although we weren't quite sure at the time whether Professor Ischinger really believed it.
And then there was Trump. And just after the election, we had a class on, I don't remember. And I don't remember because we spent the whole day talking about Trump. And this unique group of people coming from different places and with different aspirations for the future tried to make sense of it all. And if Anna hadn't taught us to drink mate with Uruguayan serenity, we may not have made it through the chaos. But you weren't here for that. How's Washington these days?
Well, it's everything the fake media says it is. No, in all seriousness, here at Hertie, we learned all the tools, how to collect revenues, how to spend it wisely, how to nudge, how to draft policies. But did the inventors of governance foresee the end of the Western consensus or of liberal democracy, as Constanze has just alluded to? The end of reason in politics? What if my government asks me to use all my Hertie skill to build the tallest and most beautiful wall? Or does my Hertie degree now mean that I'm a member of the deep state? I'm not sure. I remember 2 years ago when we joined this group of people, I was 100% certain that we would never be building walls between the two of us. Now in 2017, I think there are a couple of walls or fences or whatever between Belgrade and Berlin. What I know for sure is I'm never going to build a wall between Dominica and myself.
If anything, our time at Hertie has taught us that it is in our hands, as mid-career and experienced employees in the public, private, and non-profit sector, to shape our future as a global community. And the community we have found here as a class, but also with faculty, administration, and guest speakers from all walks of life, suggests to us that this is possible.
For the new students here, you won't get that with an MBA. For closing remarks, I want to quote one of our fellow students who's graduating with us today, Juan, who said, and I quote, "I am happy to have had the opportunity to learn at Hertie. As a foreigner, I can say it represents the good things of Germany and its people, whom I respect and admire. I shall never forget my time here." End of quote. Ivana, shall these lessons and friendship remain with us?
Wir schaffen das.
Thank you. Before we leave the stage, apart from the thanks to families, friends, and professors, well, at least those who extended due dates, there are 3 people in this room, or 2 actually, because one of them is absent, I believe, who deserve a special thank you from us.
Hanneli, Juliane, and Robert, for the blood, sweat, and tears, a small token of our appreciation.
So we are almost there. Ladies and gentlemen, dear Constanze Stelzenmüller, dear Hertie community, dear new EMPA students, but most of all, Dear EMPA graduates, the class of 2017. First of all, I want to thank the student speakers very much for their wonderful speech. I also want to thank you, Constanze, very much for your wonderful and touching speech. And I could relate to many things you mentioned, especially the feeling in the 1980s. I felt exactly the same way. It is a very true honor for me to celebrate this very, very special day with you. It's a very special day for you, for your family, for your friends, but it is also a very special day for us here at the Hertie School, for the faculty, for the EMPA team, for the whole school. And perhaps also on a very personal note, I must say that today, living through the experiences of your graduation, of our graduation day, of the EMPA ceremony, but also looking back at our introductory course of the EMPA we started yesterday, and the fantastic opening we had yesterday evening with the opening of the academic year, I must say that once again, I'm very, very proud to be part of the Hertie family. You came here 1 or 2 years ago to start a new program, our EMPA. It is a program now very prominent on the European map, but even beyond. We started out with 23 students 9 years ago in 2008, and we now have 69 students enrolled in the EMPA and almost 200 alumni. We are, and this is one of the things that makes our program so special and so unique, and we've heard that in your speech and in the speeches before, we are a truly international gang. This year's graduates have moved to Berlin for one-year programs from as far as Australia or Uruguay. Others have flown in for their courses from New York City, from Moscow, from Bucharest, Helsinki, Brussels, Geneva, Vienna, and many other places. But you not only come from different parts of the world, you also bring to the program very different backgrounds. Some of you are trained economists, lawyers, journalists, engineers, and quite a few have degrees in one of the plentiful domains of the social sciences. Today we also welcome our 25 new EMPA students from 19 different nations. The 69 enrolled EMPA students in this academic year even come from 27 different countries, and this is the most international EMPA class ever. This year, we welcome students from countries we have not had in the EMPA before, and we're especially proud of that. Slovenia, South Korea, Turkey, making this year's EMPA network even richer. While the new cohort is as diverse as every year, the biggest group of students comes again from non-German administration. In the past years, we have become a true international public administration program, recruiting its participants worldwide, and I think that is absolutely unique. Now, as a member of the faculty who has been teaching in the EMPA for quite a long time now, I've always been extremely fascinated and interested in your motivation to actually go back to school again, to actually go back to a university and do an EMPA. Whenever I have engaged in discussions about this with you, and we had many of them, I admired your wish to think outside of the box. Your wish to connect to other disciplines, ideas, to different sectors, your open-mindedness, your drive, and your inspiration, your true inspiration to change things. And you are, I must say that, a very, very distinguished group. A group I admire, above all, for your curiosity, for your intrinsic motivation to go back to school, for your hunger and for your eagerness to learn more, and for your hunger to truly understand more. And of course, as we all know, that comes with a price tag, no doubt. Some of you gave up your secure jobs to move up to Berlin. Some of you have interrupted their careers to engage in the more intense version of the EMPA, the one-year program. And some of you took up the burden to travel to Berlin regularly to be part of our program. All of you invested a tremendous amount of time in coursework, in readings, in assignments, in discussions with us, in writing your assignments, in thesis, in keep asking questions, and also in challenging us, the faculty, and others in so many wonderful and truly inspiring ways. By coming here, by giving up, or at least putting on hold your successful jobs, you made uncertainty your friend. At my age, and I think I can say that, you have learned and experienced that uncertainty actually never really goes away, something you don't really think when you're in your mid-20s. The true art is, if you want to challenge, and if you want to change matters, if you want to change things, if you want to think outside of the box, you have to make uncertainty your friend. And you all come here with this friend. Probably it's not your best one, but it's become a good friend, a companion. And that companion makes you go out as motivators, as changers, as bridge builders, as people who challenge others, and who truly think outside of the box. I also want to take the opportunity to thank the whole EMPA team, which is a true pleasure to work with. I'm sure that the students agree that the team, Susan, Robert, Juliane, Alyssa, Teresa, Jan, and Hanneli, deserve a huge round of applause. And we now come, and I think I share that with you, to the most important item of today's agenda, the conferment of your very well-deserved degrees, and I would like to ask President Anheier on stage for that. So, Mahid Aslan. Maher Spatter. Karen Ernst. Dominika Barbara Florinska. Juan Gersenich Eckers. Erik Friemel. Daniela Giannone. Kai Gotthard. Christoph Hampel. Anton Hufnagel. Jennifer Käse. Fabian Leber. Thor Lund Larsen. Anna Ines Morato-Bove. Bigin Goyen. Hanna Omerod. Angela Gabrielle Palmer. Ivana Panjavet. Timo Röcke. Markus Schief. Tazio Schilling.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, the class of 2017, congratulations again. We'd like to thank Constanza for a very inspiring, very moving commencement speech. Well done indeed, and thanks for coming here today. Thanks also go, of course, to the EMPA team, but last but not least, I think Christine Kreitz and the communication team have done a fantastic job. Once again, in making sure that the graduation has the right combination of gravitas, a celebratory spirit, but also that it is fun, after all. So on that note, we are now going to turn to the most serious part of this afternoon. We'll have a reception. And the reception is over there. So it's just out there, and please do join us, stay around, mingle, and let's have a glass on the class of 2017. Thank you.